24-2, and what to show for it. Mark Rogers TV back with you as we continue to power our way through the Power 5 conference schedules for 2014. We're, of course, talking about Urban Meyer's Ohio State Buckeyes. All right, Jim Tressel's Tattoo Gate left Luke Fickell on the sideline for a 6-7 campaign in 2011. Then it was Urban Meyer to the rescue, and very much to the rescue. He has basically delivered. 12-0 in 2012, but the Buckeyes couldn't back it up in a BCS National Championship game or even a Big Ten Championship game. All right, they were all set up for a big year last year. They ripped off 12 consecutive wins, didn't garnish much respect from the national media, somewhat rightfully so because of the schedule, although the Big Ten was very much underrated, but they didn't play anybody non-conference. Not Urban Meyer's fault. They faltered in the Big Ten Championship game, blew a touchdown lead in the second half. Took on Clemson in the Orange Bowl, tried to make amends there, lost a tough game. We're missing three of their top defenders in that game, and Clemson ripped them up on offense. All right, 40-35 loss for the Buckeyes. So they're sitting, much like Alabama, with a two-game losing streak, but without the SEC perception and partial reality to back it up. So Ohio State, 2014, along with Michigan State, is the favorites, depending on your service, depending on who you listen to. Favorites for a Big Ten championship and maybe a national playoff appearance. All right, let's look at the Buckeyes' schedule. And this was one of the reasons for the detraction across the nation much of last season. They didn't schedule anyone non-conference the past 2 years. So even that undefeated team in 2012, and with the Big Ten down, people were saying, okay, the Buckeyes, we can't see them in a bowl game or a Big Ten championship game. They're 12-0, great. But they beat Cal last season, ripped off 12 straight. And, yeah, they beat some good teams in the Big Ten, but Cal again. And Cal was supposed to be better, of course, when Ohio State scheduled them, but at the same time, they turned out to be an awful, awful football team. And the Buckeyes barely beat them 2 years ago, handled them nicely in 2013. In Jim Tressel's heyday, the Big Ten was better, especially during the early to mid-2000s, much better. And also, they scheduled Texas home and home, and the Longhorns delivered a good football team, like a top 5 football team. USC home and home, Miami home and home. They played teams. Okay, they kind of get back to that with Virginia Tech this season, but the Hokies, probably not a top 25 team, although the schedule for them plays out. We'll get to the ACC a little bit later. All right, let's knock out the Buckeyes, starting with Navy at noon on the road in M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore. I like this game. No, it shouldn't be the top non-conference game for Ohio State. It probably shouldn't be the second game. You're Ohio State. I took my shots at Alabama for not scheduling anyone. They've got West Virginia. I'll do the same with Ohio State. Now, Virginia Tech's a nice scheduled game. You could have a Hokies team that would be in the top 10 some years, but it's not elite. And I know you can't completely control the schedule, but like Ohio State, to schedule somebody huge. Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame out of the Midwest, the powers in the SEC, Oklahoma, Texas need to have somebody big on the schedule, and Ohio State's got Virginia Tech. Okay, the Navy game, once again, if it's the second or third best game on the schedule, non-conference, great. Nice little game on the road there to start the campaign. Then they've got a night game in Columbus against Virginia Tech. The Hokies probably a top 30, top 35 team. So the Buckeyes prove nothing if they win. And the Hokies, I'm not saying that they're going to roll over Virginia Tech. At the same time, Ohio State not going to be given their due unless they really dominate in that game against Virginia Tech. And the Hokies have a nice season. Otherwise, Buckeyes win that game by a touchdown or 10 points. Not going to get much street cred for that. Then they've got the two in-state games. They've got Kent State. They typically play somebody in-state. They actually have to, based on Ohio legislation that goes back to 1998 and cost them a BCS appearance that year in the championship game. Kent State on September 13th. The Golden Flash is not as good this past season without Darrell Hazel, who went to Purdue. And then Cincinnati, that game at Ohio Stadium as well. The Bearcats and the Buckeyes get together quite often. And Tommy Tuberville's team coming off, I believe, a 10-3 campaign in 2013. Should be a decent game, but again, a game that the Buckeyes will not be given credit for even if the Bearcats have a nice season, because it's a America Athletic Conference team at Cincinnati, and that's just the way it is. You got to beat the big boys if you're Ohio State. With this schedule, the non-conference is not going to help them, again, unless Virginia Tech really goes on a roll and beats some good teams in the ACC. The Buckeyes need the Big Ten to step up, so they need Michigan State to play well out of conference, and the other teams in the Big Ten. As we talk about with the SEC, the ACC, and the Big Ten in particular, since we're starting with those conferences, who do you play in the other division? So we know the big shakeup in the Big Ten with Maryland and Rutgers in the East. They split East and West. They did it the right way. They finally corrected that legends and leaders business. All right, move Wisconsin over to the West. And so Ohio State plays everybody in the East. Unfortunately, only played 2 crossover games in the West. Let's see who they are. Illinois. Does that help them or hurt them? Well, it helps them in terms of keeping possibly an undefeated season alive, but hurts them in regards to perception. So another thing that hurt the Buckeyes last season is that they didn't play the best teams out of the other division last season. Michigan State, Nebraska, they did not play those teams in building up a resume for a possible national championship game at that point. So they play Illinois out of the other division and Minnesota. The Golden Gophers coming off a nice 8-5 campaign. Very much a step in the right direction for Jerry Kill, but Minnesota not preseason top 25, and unless they get off to an exceptional start, play well in the Big Ten, by the time the Buckeyes face them on November 15th, Minnesota probably outside the top 25. So those 2 games do not help Ohio State, except for in the win column most likely, with a trip to Minnesota in November and going to Illinois on the first day of November. So the Big Ten slate, after those 4 non-conference games, line up like this. Maryland and Rutgers, the first 2 games in the Big Ten for the Buckeyes in 2014, the 2 newcomers to the Big Ten. Excuse me, at Maryland, Rutgers at home. Then they play Penn State and Illinois. They've got the Nittany Lions on the road in Happy Valley. James Franklin trying to make a statement there, I'm sure. Then they've got Michigan State. At this point, the way things set up and the way things will probably play out is this will be the game of the year in the Big Ten. Michigan State hosting Ohio State. Buckeyes did not play the Spartans last year until the Big Ten championship game. Beat Michigan State by 1 point in East Lansing 2 years ago. So Michigan State, Ohio State, mark it down, November 8th. Then they've got Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan. Much like the Wolverines' schedule, the Buckeyes' schedule is not daunting because they get a break in the other division, Illinois and Minnesota. They've spaced out all the difficult games, so no daunting stretch like we've seen in the SEC. And actually, we saw out of Maryland and Rutgers' schedule where they have to play like a Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan State all in a row. For Ohio State, it's Virginia Tech in week 2. It's Penn State 5 weeks later. It's Michigan State a couple weeks after that. And it's Michigan. And we don't know how good the Wolverines are going to be. They've got all those top 10 recruiting classes on the roster, but it's not come to fruition for Brady Hoke. All right, for the Buckeyes, of course, we're throwing out records to a certain extent, not holding me on record for those predictions right now. But if they hold the chalk, they're probably going to be an underdog, possibly at East Lansing. If Michigan State is a one-loss team or a no-loss team at that point, the Buckeyes going to be a slight underdog at East Lansing because of the home road situation. Otherwise, they're a substantial favorite in all these games, and they're expected to play in a Big Ten championship game and possibly go undefeated to the national playoff. So Buckeyes fans, defend your schedule. I think it's decent with Virginia Tech on board instead of Cal the last 2 seasons, but at the same time would love to see what we're going to see in future years with Oklahoma and Tennessee, excuse me, and Oregon, and hopefully the Volunteers will be better when the Buckeyes play them in future seasons. So Ohio State got to play a heavyweight. It's not Virginia Tech. That's a nice game, and the Big Ten schedule sets up for wins, but not necessarily respect. Let's talk about the Buckeyes right here on Mark Rogers TV.